And members of corporate media recently had a very painful revelation following the release of Senator Bernie Sanders' fundraising totals for this quarter. Now, Senator Sanders raised a whopping $18.2 million from roughly 525,000 individual donors since entering the Democratic presidential primary in February. Now, 20% of those donors were first-time donors, and the average donation was about $20. Now, more interesting stats about that: 88% of the total came from donations of less than $200, and 99.5% of donations were for around $100 or less. The majority of donors were young people, mainly nurses and teachers. So those are the two occupations that happen to donate most to Bernie Sanders. Fascinating. So now the reason that I give you that is not necessarily because I care so much about the money. I think there's too much focus on the money, but even though it is important to run a presidential campaign, these stats have led to members of corporate media facing a very uncomfortable truth that Bernie Sanders, thanks to these totals, is the frontrunner for the Democratic Party nomination. Now, look, as I said before, the reason they come to this conclusion is because of the money. Of course. That's the only thing that people in corporate media understand. Oh my God, he's raising that much money? He must be the frontrunner. But look, I guess I'm not going to begrudge them that, right? As I said before, they think in terms of mainly how much you can raise, because most candidates used to raise all their money from corporate donors, and they would get large sums of money. And of course, you win the money race, then you are more likely to win the political race, right? It's that old way of thinking, right? Now, 2020 is a bit different because most of the candidates now have pledged not to take big corporate PAC money, thanks to Bernie Sanders. Now, the donations, as I said, actually do matter now because it's a measure of energy, right? So if you have more donors and smaller donors, that's more of a gauge of energy for your campaign, okay, instead of relying on big giant corporations. So that's why this matters. Now, I want to give you some of the reactions here from members of corporate media upon these fundraising numbers and these revelations. Now, I'm going to start with NBC reporter Casey Hunt. Now, she tweeted this, quote, "Anyone who doesn't treat Bernie Sanders becoming the Democratic nominee as a realistic and even likely possibility is making a big mistake and failed to learn from mistakes made in 2016. That is an NBC News political reporter, member of establishment media, saying, if you are not taking him seriously, you are making a big mistake. You are doing literal, this is my words, literal malpractice. Wow. There's more. She said, if we used the metrics of any other year and applied them to Bernie, he would be called a frontrunner. And she listed off some reasons why. First, he came in second last time against Hillary Clinton, the most well-funded and well-known politician running in 2016. Almost won Iowa, did win New Hampshire, is near the top in nearly all the polls, has huge fundraising numbers, proven appeal to the base of the party. And yet he gets ignored. It's absurd. Those were her words. She also said that literally no other candidate, with the possible exception of Biden, has anywhere near as strong a list of frontrunner attributes, and I would argue Bernie is ahead of Biden in several areas. Well, she is absolutely correct in her analysis and assessment. This is absurd. Now, a lot of us notice that there's a little bit of a double standard here. Now, why does that double standard exist? I mean, look, if Joe Biden was in the race, and he's not yet, to be fair, but he had all that stuff behind him, he had all his numbers, he would, of course, be called the frontrunner without any hesitation. Or, better example, Robert Francis O'Rourke. What if he had those numbers? He'd be called the front runner. They would hail him as the next Democratic hope, the next Barack Obama, and the one to defeat Trump in 2020. It wouldn't even be a question of how they would treat Beto O'Rourke or Kamala Harris. Who, by the way, Kamala Harris had another impressive fundraising haul. She raised $12 million. And yes, she had a lot of small donors as well. So credit where credit is due. Nonetheless, they would treat her as a front runner, but not Senator Bernie Sanders. And of course, why is that? Because it is Bernie Sanders. And the establishment has basically already made the decision that they despise him. And they've despised him ever since 2016. And the reason is simple. He shake out the system, right? There are a lot of people right now who are heavily invested in the status quo. And they don't want change. They would rather have a Republican. They would rather have another 4 years of Donald Trump than have a progressive that would end, for example, money in politics. Where do a lot of these media figures or media companies get their money? From advertisements. Bernie Sanders says, I want to get rid of that. I want to get the money out of politics. Now, speaking of media, let's go to CNN. Now, CNN had an interesting discussion, including Jake Tapper and his panel. Here's that conversation.
Bernie Sanders, of declared candidates, overwhelmingly leading in fundraising, leading in polls nationally and in key states, the largest number of individual donors and small dollar amounts. I think it's just, you can't even deny it. He is the Democratic presidential frontrunner of declared candidates.
On April 3rd of 2019.
April 2nd. Yes,
April 2nd, sorry, of 2019. I also think 20% of his donors were new. And that's an incredibly impressive number, and one that I think exceeds most people's expectations of what would happen here. I think many Democrats thought that he hit his high water point in 2016, that he'd come back in the race, he'd be leading in the beginning, and then he would kind of fizzle out. That hasn't happened. So there's a reality about the strength of his candidacy, the amount of money he raised, $28 million cash on hand. He's going to be in this through the long haul, no doubt about it.
So make one more point too. He has another asset too, experience. He's actually run a presidential campaign before.
What kind of world have I dropped into? They were actually speaking positively about Bernie Sanders on CNN. Jake Tapper, of all people. Like, he's the front runner. I mean, he's the front runner. And the other guy says, yeah, and he also has experience. He's run a presidential campaign before. And so he's going to be here for quite some time. Wow. Undeniable. Now, of course, that has establishment figures and basically anti-Bernie Twitter pundits completely flipping out. And it's kind of awesome. I mean, they're out there saying, how dare you point out facts? How dare you? We hate Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is just like Donald Trump. He's got no chance. He has no chance. He's literally the Democratic frontrunner. He's not, no chance. No chance. Look, as far as him being like Donald Trump, and I love that attack because of how absurd it is. You know, he's literally the inverse of Donald Trump. For one, he's too nice. We'll get into that in another segment. He doesn't, really attack people. Yes, he's come out with very harsh on Donald Trump. But generally, he's very, he treats Democratic colleagues that he's running against with kids' gloves. And so the only thing that he's really had the temerity to attack is, and I should say to attack very strongly, is, again, Donald Trump, but mostly the system. And the system that is broke for a lot of Americans. And Bernie Sanders is one of the few that actually has a detailed plan in order to fix some of these systemic problems. So, and look, the solutions that he has are deeply popular, that he brought into the mainstream of the Democratic Party. He brought into the debate. Now, I love the response to that, of course, is, well, now that Bernie Sanders has brought all these ideas, now he just has to step back and let someone else run with it. That doesn't make any sense. So you go into the party and you make these ideas, a living wage, free college for all. You make these ideas popular, mainstream planks to the party, and then what? You're just supposed to sit to the side? Well, I mean, his ideas are already popular, so I guess we don't need him anymore. No, but he's literally the only one that's been fighting for these ideas for 30, 40 years, his entire career, decades. So, and look, of course, the Green New Deal, that's also a new idea, mainly brought by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, having some establishment figures also sign on to it as well. And that's also incredibly popular among Democratic voters. We wouldn't have an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez if we didn't have Bernie Sanders, by the way, or the Justice Democrats, to give them credit as well. So all of those ideas, by the way, progressives winning of these elections and Medicare for all, etc., all that stuff was considered fringe back in 2016 by these same reporters, these same people. And yet, these ideas, when you go through and you poll them with the American public, they're incredibly popular. They all poll over 70%. And here's the thing. I don't think they still get it. I know they're like coming to the realization finally that like, oh man, Bernie Sanders, he is something to be reckoned with. Wow, I can't believe that. They're acting super surprised because in their minds, in the Washington bubble, they would have never thought that a self-described socialist could be the front runner of the Democratic Party. It never crossed their minds. I mean, how can this guy be so popular? My friends in the health insurance industry tell me that Medicare for all is awful. It's horrible. That everybody loves their private insurance. I mean, all these other Democrats are still, even Democrats that I like, are still open to, well, there are many paths to get to Medicare for all, and so, or truly universal health care, so maybe we could go with the public option, et cetera, Medicare Plus, extra for all, which is the ridiculous plan. It's not actually single payer. No, they're wrong. They're wrong. And so Bernie Sanders, he's finally starting to make some headway. He finally started to break through that Washington bubble. And you can bet that there's going to be a lot of people, especially like Trump, that are not going to see him coming. Now, interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders was just invited and accepted an invitation to do, I think, a town hall on Fox News. So if Fox News is starting to take him seriously, watch out. But and Jake Tapper also starting to take him seriously. Some of these NBC reporters, he's starting to break through. Some of them have at least seemed to have learned from 2016. Even, I wouldn't say, Peter Dow, but kind of. He hasn't come out to support Bernie Sanders or anything like that, but he's certainly challenging the Democratic Party in a way that he's never done so before. And I got to give him credit. I do. And so, but seriously though, Bernie Sanders has spent the last couple of years since Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump, laying the groundwork for the next run, visiting different states, reaching out to the black community, people of color, choosing an amazingly talented and diverse campaign staff. And look, the result is Bernie Sanders, he's coming. He's coming to fight, and he's ready for that fight. And anybody who underestimates him is going to get very much surprised. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.